We are live. Back in action. Actuali podcast in full effect. What's up, everybody? Welcome, welcome, welcome. File on in. Get yourself comfortable. Just loading everything up over here. We're going live on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you all so much for joining us on this ongoing journey through the wonder of meaning making. And in this current series, we've been covering John Vervaake's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. We are now on episode 49, covering Corbin and Jung, or Jung, however you wish to pronounce that name. All right, looks like we're alive in all of the places. I'm going to share this up on the socials. How's everybody doing out there?
Yeah.
Go ahead and throw some comments down wherever you may be. We'll try and keep up with y'all. DJ's on YouTube, and I'm covering us on Facebook and Twitch over here. Yeah, how's everybody feeling out there? Say hello if you're in the room already.
I'll be in the chat for a bit, at least until my phone dies.
Yeah, how was your week, man? You're just finishing a 2-day fast you were telling me about. We just had a great dinner.
I'm
here.
going to try for the week, and if I still feel good, I'm going to go for 2 weeks. But it's a 20 hours off, 4 hours on, but really it's, one meal and then snacking. And then trying to get in shape because I'm tired of being a fat body and feeling like garbage. So, that stuff.
Hey, man, that's good motivation, though, ain't it?
Yeah, well,
Good work making it happen, man. I know it ain't easy.
I got the total gym and some other stuff downstairs, so might as well use it.
Nice.
It just sits there gathering dust, so.
Isn't it funny how we'll do these kinds of things? We'll make the initial move to get something we know is going to be good for us, but then the next step of actually, taking it on is a whole other game. You just got to start without even thinking about it. Your mind will sit there and convince you of 15 other things you could do instead,
And the hard part about this, too, is it's not just a regular fast, but elimination of all sugars and most starches. You can't get away from eating starch. I mean, like, onions have starch. Collard greens have starch. Or not starch, but carbohydrates.
Right.
Beef has carbohydrates. Everything has carbohydrates, but, it's just...
Trying to limit the amount that you take in. It's
yeah.
Complex carbohydrates aren't as bad as the ultra refined kinds of carbs that we find in our modern diets.
Yeah, you want more of your carbohydrates to be, fiber, and you don't need, ridiculous amounts of fiber in your diet. I've been looking up the nutritional values of different foods and then how much, the average person is supposed to consume and all that stuff. And, with the amount of collard greens we ate earlier, each portion had about a quarter of all the fiber that you need in your day. So, and that wasn't a lot of greens mixed in with those onions. So that's,
Those collard greens were good, though.
Oh, yeah. But sugar cravings were real yesterday, though. Oh, man.
Oh, I believe it, man. It's
like,
funny how when you stop
just,
eating sugar, man, you start craving it like a drug, like it's nicotine or something.
Yeah, luckily, today I feel fine.
Nice.
I had my coffee without any sweetener in it, so. And I'm not doing the fake sugars either because I don't do that. That stuff is not.
Don't
good
mess
for
with
you.
that stuff, fam. That stuff is no bueno.
Even like the
Aspartame.
well,
like
and
that,
even stuff like stevia and other
sucralose, stevia.
extracts and
Oh,
stuff.
stevia doesn't even taste that good.
It tastes like crap.
Yeah,
But
you can find blends sometimes of.
I mean, you cook an onion long enough, it goes sweet.
Right.
Asparagus is
Well, the
apparently
peppers
sweet.
and
the
onions
peppers.
and the collard greens you made were nice and sweet.
Yeah.
And that is a more complex carbohydrate too. The body's got to do more work to break it down.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've been trying out here, changing ourselves one little bit at a time, and I hope y'all are out there doing the same too. We got to grow in this world. We got to adapt.
Yeah, and it's so one thing about me, and I don't know if we've discussed this on air, is I used to be like really into working out and like powerlifting and crap. And I'm starting to, now that I'm working out again, it's like, oh yeah, okay, got to be careful with that because it is like a drug. I mean, like through high school, I had a weight bench in my room, and lifted most of the day kind of stuff. So it is an addictive thing, but it feels good, like hurts in the moment. Sometimes it feels like I was doing like some extended crunch sets, and when I stood up, man, it was like this close to full on cramp in my abdomen. And I'm like, nope, don't do it. Push the belly out. Don't do it. Don't cramp on me, because that's the worst, man, when you get one of those like core cramps. But then after it was done, I'm like, oh, I actually feel pretty good once it chilled out.
Right.
It feels good. It can that if you want to replace an addiction, I guess working out is probably not the worst, as long as you don't do the workout to the point where your muscles start eating itself. What do they call that? Rhabdo or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
And then you start peeing it out, and then your kidneys turn to crap, and then you die.
That's no good.
If you go too far. Never
So
had that happen.
Thankfully, right? Yeah. Do we want to do a rehash of the last episode, or you want to just jump on?
I think we should shoot on. I don't have too much of it in my head, and I'm feeling a little woo, because it's day 2 of...
I'm looking at Mr. Mark Mulvey's notes on episode 49 right now.
Yeah, if there's anything that pops out specifically, I can find my notes on them. That might help my poor brain. The body's feeling better, but my brain feels like soup.
Well, basically, in the last episode, I remember we talked about the divine double. And rather than trying to create your truest self out of your current self through the having mode, by trying to achieve and obtain things, they actually, people like Jung and Corbin and others talked about trying instead for aspiration. So aspiring towards, growth towards. So there's this idea of a divine double, which is like, say, your guardian self, or the ultimate version of yourself at the end of time, like the ultimate ideal of what you could be actually exists, and that's your true self, and the self that you're inhabiting now must aspire to become one with that true self. And
so
that's a really cool
non-logical aspiration. So it's not, aspiration isn't logical as far as, you want to be, like what he's saying in the last episode, like you want to go to, an art appreciation class to learn how to appreciate art. But that means you already had a certain appreciation to begin with, to aspire to appreciate art by going to the class to learn how to appreciate art.
Yeah.
And there's this, and it's a frame shift as you go, opposed to,
because you don't appreciate art at first, but as soon as you start taking on the mode of appreciating art, somehow you paradoxically can trick yourself into a true moment of being.
Okay, so when it comes to the divine double, it's not this opposite, or this other self or something like that. It's the highest example of what you can frame shift into.
That's right. And it's ultimately like the truest self.
Yeah. Something of pure shining phenomenon. He'll get into it better than I can. My brain is like complete mush at this point.
That's all right. Yeah. So I'll read one paragraph real fast from Mark Mulvey's notes. Cool. And let me I'll flip screen here real fast. Archetypes are not images. They are imaginary things you possess in your mind, but as imaginal things that are leading you into the aspirational process of individuation. Systems of constraints, and now this is a quote from Vervaeke, systems of constraints, virtual engines that regulate the self-organization of what is salient to us. Think of the archetype much more adverbally than adjectively. So very much more of a verb than an adjective.
Yeah, and then there's the distinction between imaginary, like you're looking at it, and then imaginal, which you're looking through it, as if it was translucent, or like your glasses.
Because Jung was he had a lot to say. He's very much would critique literalism and fundamentalism. And Jung talks about this self-organization process and these virtual engines as autopoietic, meaning they have life to them. Archetypes are the way the psyche makes itself as a living organism. he talks of the relationship between the ego and the self, and he capitalizes self because he's referring more to the idea of the second sacred self, not the more traditional self that people might associate with their personal beingness.
Yeah, so Corbin, at least the note here says, Corbin has this statement, the angel, you see it as the angel, and then there's this, oh no, because we're looking at the angel imaginary opposed to imaginal. So you're looking through this lens of what you want to be, the angel, if you will, the best potential that you can
And
be.
so the imaginary is more
And you're
fantastical, more fantasy, and the imaginal is more like utilizing a symbol to see through the symbol.
Yeah. Well, kind of like, how like like an archetype within a story. You're not looking at that archetype. You may be in the story looking at the man and his sword and him fighting the dragon, but you're looking through the archetype and how it, say, applies to yourself.
Yes,
even though
so
that's
that hero
quite
archetype
non-logical
gives
as well.
gives us an example that we can attempt to live according to.
Yeah, aspire to.
Aspire towards, yes, yes. Yes, because that more traditional self that people might associate with their own personal beingness, that is the more narcissistic sense of the world. The ego is the archetype of the conscious mind, while the self is more akin to Plato's archetype of the good and the principle of autopoiesis itself, self-making beings that we are. The dialogue between the ego and the self is what Jung called the axis mundi, the axis of the world. The ego individuates through its dialogues with the sacred second self. I think that's enough for us to jump on in, guys. Yeah. So we're going to do that. We're jumping on in. It's John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis that we are covering here on Meaning Making 101. If you guys appreciate what we're doing here at all, you'd like to see where all of this goes, make sure that you like and you subscribe. And, throw down some comments if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to say at all. We welcome dialogue. And make sure that you give some love to John Vervaeke as well. John has done a tremendous amount of work releasing this 50 lecture series and then everything that comes after it. So definitely go and check out John's channel and give him some love as well. All right, y'all, we are jumping on in. This is John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, episode 49 on Corbin and Jung.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time we followed Heidegger into the depths where we encountered Eckhart and this non-teleological relationship to the play of being, and that led us very directly into Corbin and Corbin's core argument that gnosis, as we've been using it, relates centrally, the ability to engage in this serious play relates centrally to the imagination. But Corbin is making use of this term in a new way. He makes the distinction between the imaginary, which is how we typically use the word the imagination, and mental images in my head that are only subjective and have no objective reality, and the imaginal which mediates between the abstract intelligible world and the concrete sensible world, and transjectively mediates between the subjective and the objective, and that is not done statically. All of this mediation and mutual affordance is done in an ongoing transformative transframing, and that the symbol captures all of this. And then I wanted to bring out Corbin's core symbol. And it's a core symbol that relates directly to gnosis, because in gnosis, in this transformative participatory knowing, and this goes to the core of Heidegger's notion of Dasein, the being whose being is in question, we have to see self-knowledge and knowledge of the world as inextricably bound up together. In order to do that, we are pursuing Corbin's central symbol, the angel, which of course is immediately off-putting to many people, including myself, but I've been trying to get a way of articulating how Corbin is incorporating both Heidegger and Persian Sufism, Neoplatonic Sufism, into this understanding of the symbol. And I recommended that we take a look at the work of first of all, of Stang, the historical work, showing how throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and up and through the Hellenistic period and beyond, up until the period of easily Pseudo-Dionysius around, the 5th century of the Common Era. There's the pursuit of the divine double. And then the idea is one that is deeply transgressive of our cultural cognitive grammar of decadent romanticism, where we are born with our true self that nearly needs to express itself, a la Rousseau, and that the core virtue is authenticity, which is being true to the true self that you have, you possess, rather than, for example, a Socratic model in which the true self is something towards which you are constantly aspiring. And then I recommended trying to make this, and what's the transgressive mythology? The transgressive mythology is that the self that I have now is not my true self. My true self is my divine double. This is something that is superlative to me. It is bound to me. It is my double. It is bound to me, but it is superlative to me. It is both me and not me. It's me as I'm meant to be, as I should be, and that the project, the existential project, is not one of expressing a self that you have, but of transcending to become a self that is ecstatically ahead of you in an important way. And then I pointed out that for many of you, this would still be sort of okay, but I get the transgression, but I still find this notion of a divine double unpalatable. Maybe for some of you, you don't. But nevertheless, I think there is an important way by picking up on, by asking the question, why did so many people for so long believe in this so deeply? Picking up on the question of what's going on there and focusing on this aspirational process. And this takes us back into work that was core to the discussion I made about Gnosis, and has had a resounding impact at various places throughout this series, which is L.A. Paul's work on transformative experience. And then somebody who's from the same school, influenced by Paul, having a different view, whereas Paul is more, her transformations are more like insight. Agnes Callard's notion of aspiration is much more developmental, but I argue that they can be, I think, readily reconciled together if you see development as a link sequence of insights that bring about qualitative change in your competence. So we were zeroing in on this, I'm using L.A. Paul and Agnes Callard to triangulate into this relationship of aspiration. And picking up, first of all, on Callard's important point that is not addressed, and this is an important point by L.A. Paul, the deep connections between aspiration and rationality. That rationality is itself is an aspirational process. And if we make the process by which we become rational itself not a rational or irrational process, we will get into serious, a position that is seriously self-undermining. Similarly, if the way in which you become wise does not involve sort of wise acts and behavior, if the process itself is not itself wise, you're going to get into all kinds of difficulties. If it's not in some sense a rational process, again, last time I reminded you how broadly, but I think also deeply, I'm using the term rational. Or being educated. I mean, we make ourselves better, maybe even more rational or wiser by going through an education. But education, at least a liberal education, is a deeply aspirational process. If that itself is not part of what makes us rational, is that if it's not itself a rational process, then of course our rationality is again being undermined in an self-contradictory fashion. So the basics of this argument is if we do not understand a kind of rationality Callard calls proleptic rationality, that's the rationality of aspiration, the rationality that allows you, that is the rationality that emerges in education, that emerges in the cultivation of rationality, that emerges in the cultivation of wisdom, then a lot of human behavior is not going to be called rational, and that is going to render our notion of rationality, as I've said, self-contradictory and self-undermining in some very fundamental ways. And so again, we see the rejoining of love and reason that was originally talked about so deeply in Plato. So now we've come back to this problem. I gave you the example of somebody in a liberal education, and this is Collard's example, right? Here's the self at this time and the self at this time. And something I brought out that Keller doesn't, but it's important because it's a concise way of talking about the relationship between them, and that there isn't a direct inferential relationship between these, which is non-logical identity. Right? This is part and parcel. Like, think about what I said earlier, how we broaden the notion of rationality outside of logic. If Callard is right, and we have to include rationality, proleptic rationality, in our model of rationality, and involves this non-logical identity, then of course we're stepping beyond sort of a purely logical understanding of rationality. Yet again, for yet another reason. Okay, so what's the problem here? Well, the problem is the problem of non-logical identity. So I don't appreciate, always remember both meanings of that term too deeply, and they're interwoven, the two sides of aspiration. I deeply understand it, and I'm deeply grateful for it. I value it, right? I don't appreciate classical music. I don't have the taste for it. I don't get it. And I want to be somebody who appreciates classical music. Now, if I do that because I want to satisfy a current desire I have, a current value I have, like I value impressing my friends, or I value attracting members of the opposite sex, or something like that, then of course I'm not actually aspiring, because this person doesn't appreciate classical music because it impresses their friends, or because it helps them in their dating life, or for whatever other reason. They appreciate it for a perspectival and participatory knowing that S1 doesn't have. That's the point. The appreciation that S2 has is bound to perspectival and participatory knowing, of which S1 is ignorant. And that, of course, is one of the central points, if you remember, of L.A. Paul's argument about transformative experience. So it looks like there's something, right? There's a fundamental discontinuity here. Okay, now to bring out the problem that we need to sort of resolve and bring back and tie this back to the notion of the divine double, I want to talk about a way in which Callard shows us how this is problematic as we try to talk about it. And she makes use of the work of Strawson, Galen Strawson, and he talks about a paradox of self-creation. Right? Now Strawson points out that for self-creation, and doesn't this look like self-creation? Here's a self creating itself, right? Right. For self-creation to be truly an instance of self and creation, sort of emphasizing both sides of that double form, two things are needed. One requirement, right, is a continuity requirement. There has to be something deeply continuous between S1 and S2, because, right, if they are not the same self, then it's not an act of self-creation, right? If they're not the same self, it's not an act of self-creation. So that's the continuity requirement. And so I'm going to represent it like this, right? S1 equals S2. So what this means is if S1 is hit by a motorcycle and their brain is damaged and they act and behave in a different way, that's not an act of self-creation. That is not an act of self-creation. S1 has to be totally responsible for S2, or else it's not an act of self-creation, putting an emphasis on the self. Okay, but now let's shift to the creation side, right? Which is that there has to be real novelty between them, or else there's no creation involved. If S1 just develops a skill or ability they already have, that is not real novelty. That is just more of the same. That's quantitative development, not qualitative development. So, right, if all that happens is S1, improves their skill, deepens their capacity to acquire something that they already value, etc., that, right, is not real novelty. So real novelty means there has to be a fundamental difference between S1 and S2. Now, what Strawson does with this, right, is he points out, notice how, right, S1 and S2 for the continuity requirement have to be equal, but the real novelty means there has to be a real deep difference between S1 and S2, right, or it's not creation. And so what he argues is he argues that self-creation is paradoxical. In fact, the point he's trying to make is it's self-contradictory. There can be no such thing as self-creation, right? So, another way of thinking about this is, if you remember when we talked about this in connection with transformative experience, we can invoke Fodor's notion of the idea that you can't sort of create a stronger logic by logically manipulating